Greetings from Forts. I'm Nagashankar, Senior GPM from Forts. We welcome all the participants to this public awareness webinar on diabetes awareness. We thank Rotary Club of Adayar and Chennai Specialty Clinic for giving us an opportunity to conduct such webinars of public awareness for the general public every month. We started this webinar series in the month of September and we are now in the fifth successful public awareness webinar today. Foods is in the pharma industry for the past 43 years, following the motto of innovating for good health. We from Foods have complete range of diabetes and its complication management brands like Medfil, VG1, Foods B, Nefrosave, and Regeneron. At present, we are exporting our products to over 50 countries around the globe. On behalf of Foods, Rotary Club of Adayar, and Chennai Specialty Clinic, it's my pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Dr. S. Venkatraman, sir. Dr. S. Venkatraman is a senior consultant diabetologist from Apollo Hospital and Surya Hospital, Chennai. Dr. S. Venkatraman is a former professor of diabetology, PG teacher, and clinical diabetologist for more than 35 years. Doctor had to his credits publication in peer-reviewed journals. Doctor is a co-investigator for ICMR studies on type 2 diabetes mellitus. And Dr. S. Venkatraman is an investigator for drug trials, including inhaler insulin formulations. And Doctor is a recipient of IDF and Lifetime Achievement Award by IMA. So it's our pleasure, sir, to have you here. I also welcome our GM Marketing, Mr. Mahesh, sir, for hosting this public awareness program. He will be taking up the questions posted by our team at the end of this program. I request all of you to post your queries and get it resolved by Dr. S. Venkatraman, the able hands to handle this diabetes awareness webinar today. With this short introduction, I hand over the session to Dr. S. Venkatraman for the further proceedings. Thank you, sir.
So thank you. Thank you, Nagashankar. Good afternoon. I hope I am audible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I don't have any slides, only the audio part of it needs to be.
Yes, sir.
Yes, good afternoon once again, and namaste to everyone who has connected. And I thank Fortsby profoundly, not only for giving an opportunity, but also to appreciate you for the efforts that you have taken, the endeavor that you have taken to have a public awareness of on some topic. I think quite often the industry is always focused on promoting dissemination of knowledge among the doctors. I think to get connected with the people, especially in this situation wherein the things are challenging and then we have to reach most of the people through a virtual platform, I think you are doing a human service, and I would appreciate Fortsby for your efforts. Thank you so much. And before I proceed, I would like to profoundly thank my good friend, Dr. N. Raghavan, the eminent urologist, a great friend, and above all, a great human being. And if I remember, right from I think at the time of the first lifting of the first phase of the lockdown, he just asked me whether I would be able to do a program for Rotary of Adayar, and I said I'll be too happy. And then thanks Narsimhan and Meera for this wonderful opportunity. And then greetings to all the people who have connected, which I understand predominantly belong to the Rotary Club of Adayar. So what I have planned to do in the next, being in the Rotary and other people who have connected today, I'm sure you would have had access to information regarding the pertinent aspects of diabetes with respect to the disease, the nature of the disease, why you need to be treated, how you need to be treated, and all of the follow-up, etc., etc. But from the clinic, from as a point of view of just initiating a public awareness program, I would like to emphasize few aspects of the disease. So more for yourself, reaffirming the existing knowledge that many of you do have, and probably some sort of a clarification with respect to some of the aspects of the disease and its manifestations and the treatment modalities. So let me begin by asking a question. What is diabetes? I think it may sound very fundamental, but quite often some people do have a doubt whether diabetes is blood sugar, that is increased amount of glucose in the blood or in the urine. So this is a very pertinent question. Now basically diabetes means increase in the blood sugar level beyond a particular level, which has been determined in the various populations and which have been taken as the yardstick for diagnosing diabetes. Now where does the question of urine sugar come? Now glucose is a fuel that is very much required by the body for the day-to-day handling by the tissues, so that the kidney serves to it tries to conserve, it tries to absorb most of the sugar. So when the blood sugar exceeds a particular level, which we technically call it as renal threshold, then glucose appears in the urine. But this appearance of the glucose in the urine is very erratic. In the context of type 2 diabetic subjects, sometimes patients may have a blood sugar of 230, urine sugar will be trace or nil. So much so, some of you might even suspect the lab, whether the values that are given are normal or some sort, because my urine sugar is nil and the blood sugar is given as 210. That can happen for some technical reasons. We wouldn't discuss in greater detail. It's more scientific. But so urine sugar is not reliable for the diagnosis of diabetes. Down the line, what happens is somehow after the blood sugar is being brought down, even at a desirable blood sugar levels, the urine sugar may be high. So at that time, somebody may have a blood sugar of 152, urine sugar may be 2 plus. You will be worried again. So it is neither useful for diagnosis of diabetes, nor is it useful to gauge the effectiveness of your treatment. And to add to everything, some of the newer drugs that are available for diabetes, excellent drugs, they act by increasing throwing a lot of glucose in the urine. So what I want to make clear at the start of this awareness program is diabetes is a disease characterized by increased blood sugar level. It can be accompanied by urine sugar. Urine sugar is unreliable both for diagnosis of diabetes as well as monitoring, we call it technically, which means the efforts that you take to gauge the effectiveness of your treatment. So that is with respect to what is diabetes. How does it happen? All of us know that whenever we talk about diabetes, insulin comes at the back of our mind. Yes, insulin is produced by the pancreas. Pancreas is an endocrine gland which produces insulin. In fact, it has got two functions. The pancreatic tissue, one it is for helping the digestion in the form of various enzymes that we call it as exocrine function, and the endocrine portion of the pancreas produces insulin. Now you might turn around and ask, does it mean that all the people who suffer from diabetes do not have adequate insulin? The answer may be no. Quite often, in the context of type 2 diabetes, we'll come to the types of diabetes a bit later. In the context of type 2 diabetes mellitus, quite often there is adequate amount of insulin in the body. I repeat, in the context of type 2 diabetes mellitus, at least the early part of the disease, there is adequate amount of insulin in the body. Then why does the sugar go up? The sugar goes up because the insulin that is available is sluggish in action. We call it as insulin resistance. So the efficacy with which the insulin is supposed to pump the sugar into the tissues, the muscle and the other tissues is defective. So you have diabetes in the pre-diabetic stage. So in other words, maintaining the glucose at a particular level, irrespective of the human intake, is determined by number one, the quantitative level of insulin produced by the pancreas, and number two, more importantly, the efficiency with which the insulin acts, which is found wanting in states of diabetes mellitus. So this is why diabetes is produced. Then why is it that we are talking more about diabetes in our country now? Now we have realized, in fact, to go back to when I was in the medical school, maybe in the early 70s when we were doing undergraduation, we believed that even among the medical community, we had a notion that probably diabetes is a disease of the West, a disease of affluence, a disease of people who are very much obese, people who eat more, got a lot of access to food, etc., etc. Then down the line, we realized that probably it is in Asia and especially India and other countries, the prevalence of diabetes is much, much more than even the West. So it is not related to the affluence, but it is related to a combination of factors, which we call it as genetic factors, which means the genes which are supposed to maintain the efficiency of insulin, and some of the genes which are supposed to maintain the insulin secretion level are probably passed on from generations to generations. Why it is happening, there are a lot of theories. We do not know why it's happening, but there are some speculative theories. I don't think we need to worry about the theoretical aspects, but suffice for it to understand that it is a genetic disease, but it is compounded by what we call as the so-called environmental factors, which means the affluence. Some of us I used to go to my school by walking. When I was in the college, I used to go by cycle. Now I think the last 25 years, excepting a four-wheeler, I don't there is no, I'm sure this could be the scenario for all of us. So relative affluence, as you ascend up in your cadre from a level wherein you become, you start earning, and then your level of affordability increases, then what happens? Spontaneously, concomitantly, your compulsive needs to exercise comes down, your access to food is increased, and you try to indulge in food which are highly calorific, the junk food, even though not the elders, at least people in the middle age and the younger individuals, the consumption of high calorific junk food and the liquid and the juices or the soft drinks. So in other words, it's a combination of genetic factors and environmental factors, but genetic factors possibly it will take a longer time. We can focus on the environmental factors. That is why nowadays we have started screening for even pre-diabetic disease, obesity, etc. in the +2 level, at the school level and college level, because there I think if you interfere, maybe you could have a meaningful impact in the prevalence of diabetes mellitus. So some of the tidbits I thought, and how to diagnose. Now, quite often I'm sure all my colleagues do have the similar experience. Somebody consults, doctor, I went for a Marcel checkup. The random blood sugar is 270. I don't have any symptoms. Can the value be wrong? Again, the notion that all diabetics should be symptomatic is not correct. For reasons again, not very much understood, at least 1/3 of the diabetics are symptomatic and majority are asymptomatic. So absence of symptoms doesn't mean that you have not had diabetes, number one, and absence of symptoms doesn't mean that the treatment that you're taking is adequate enough to keep your sugar under control. So this is absolutely important to keep at the back of your mind. Then how do you diagnose? If you're symptomatic, increased urination, weight loss, itchiness in the genitals, numbness in the feet, or tingling and burning sensation in the feet, loss of weight, craving for sweets, craving to eat. So, in other words, any health which is accompanied by what we call this technically is unequivocally elevated sugar, which means something like 350, then you don't have to require anything to diagnose diabetes. Diabetes is diagnosed. But for you to start on treatment, it is always better to have parameters like your fasting blood sugar level and your HbA1c. We'll discuss in more detail about the HbA1c, so that these two are the parameters that we conventionally employ. And if you are in doubt, somebody for research purposes and other things, somebody is asymptomatic for employment, etc., when you are in doubt, then you resort to what we used to do previously as called a glucose tolerance test. You give a fixed amount of glucose in the empty stomach, you see the pattern of the blood sugar level and categorize them as either normal or in the borderline or in the diabetic state. So diagnosis of diabetes in the presence of symptoms is easy, but to start the treatment, you require timed samples like fasting, 2 hours postprandial, and HbA1c. Diabetes can be diagnosed with fasting blood sugar and HbA1c alone, and the GTT is rarely required if you are in doubt, so that this will be discussed with your physicians. Now, what are the types of diabetes? Quite often, I'm sure many of you have connected with me today. I'm sure you would have spent years of diabetes, and there could have been situations wherein your doctor would have said, look, your diabetes is escaping control, you need insulin. At that point of time, doctor, if I am type 2 diabetes mellitus, I was told that I don't require insulin, as I told you earlier. Then why are you talking about insulin? Which means we need to understand about the types of diabetes before we react to any alteration in the treatment. Diabetes can be broadly classified as type 1 diabetes, which is a very simple disease to understand, but a complex to appreciate as to how it's happening, because we do not know exactly why it's happening, but we know what exactly is happening. What's happening is the result of the beta cells. The cells which are supposed to produce insulin are destroyed by what we call technically as an autoimmune mechanism. Don't worry about it. What it means is there is no appreciable insulin in the body, and these boys and girls, quite often it is more common in the Caucasus, more common in the West. Not that we do not have such type 1, we do have, but fortunately the burden is very less in the Asian countries. In India, it usually occurs in the younger age group. Presentation is very stormy. Sudden loss of weight in an 18-year-old individual. I saw a patient about a month back. 18 to 20 years, a healthy fellow, 65 to 57 kgs, eating a lot, losing weight, blood sugar is 350, 500, urine ketone is positive. We did the other test. Fortunately, that type of scenario is very uncommon, but it is there. It is there. The common garden variety which we have discussed and about which we are connected today is the type 2 diabetes mellitus, wherein, as I told earlier, there is adequate amount of insulin, but this insulin level is sluggish. So you have to treat in such a way that you improve the efficiency of insulin. The efficiency of insulin is predominantly dictated by number one, your body weight, adiposity. You lose weight, maybe 5% of your weight over a period of 3 months, then the insulin efficiency improves. You cut down your carbs. We'll come in some detail about the diet. Cut down your carbs. See, somebody having 7 idlis, don't do that. I can have 3 idlis. I mean, that is to be calculated based upon your height, body weight, and your lifestyle, whether it is sedentary or your working, and there is some, could be some allowance could be given for the daily exercises. Coming back to that, what I'm trying to say is weight. Now, again, coming back to the comparison between the Westerners and the Asians, we all know that people in the West are much more obese. There are two types of obesity when you talk about the weight. One is what is called by the weighing machine, and we calculate it by the BMI, that is the body mass index. That tells you about the total weight. But what is more relevant in the context of diabetes, the insulin resistance, the hypertension, and the coronary artery disease, about which I will make a passing mention sometime later, is the central adiposity. Now, somebody, say for example, I can give an example. Somebody whose body height is 165 centimeters. So his expected body weight could be somewhere between say 63 to 67 or 46. Now, if he is 71, he is overweight but not obese. But if you look at the waist circumference, it may be 95 or 100, which is very high for the Indian standard. So it is not the total body weight, it is the accumulation of the fat in the abdominal tissue that causes some impairment in the action of insulin, that causes the liver to produce more bad cholesterol, that has been associated with heart problems, and that is associated with very much hardcore endpoints. So the central adiposity is the one thing, that's the kingpin. So that is the reason that why we have a lot of diabetes, because we are often referred to as thin fat Indian, which means your body weight may be more or less near the ideal body weight or even less than that, but your waist circumference, which is a good, we call it as a surrogate marker, which is a good index of the accumulation of fat in the abdominal compartment, which is very detrimental, is very high in the Indian population. So we talked about type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes. There are other forms of rare forms of diabetes. Leave it to the physicians to diagnose and then treat appropriately. But I would like to take this opportunity, I'm sure, being the elite club of Adayar, the Rotarians, I would like to make a passing mention about the young boys and girls who are very prone for diabetes at a which is a very sad fact. Why it's happening? The scenario is somebody, say a boy or a girl is in +2, yes. After that, they go to the college, they have some amount of freedom, some free access to food. Once they get a job, quite often I think the IT industry is flooded with young boys and girls who has a sedentary lifestyle, enormous working time, and free access to junk food is enormous, so that somebody who passes out of the college with say a body weight of about 70, with a height of about 168 centimeters, without even realizing, they go on to 82 to 85 kgs, add on about 8 to 10, 15 kgs in the period of about 3 to 5 years before they get settled in life. Now, you get married, especially I'm talking in the context of the women, your obstetrician or your family physician would have told that you've got something like a PCOD, polycystic ovarian disease, you need to cut down your weight. Probably that was not taken in the spirit that it ought to have been taken, the seriousness I mean. So what happens is, you get married and then you conceive and the blood sugar is high, either in the early part of the pregnancy or later part of the pregnancy. So which means everybody has to be careful about the weight. For everybody, lifestyle modification is important, more so in the context of the young boys and women, especially the girls. I'm not saying the boys can go scot-free. They will have other complications of diabetes and obesity as well. But women, girls, you are very important because you are going to have a family life. You have to nurture you have to carry on with the pregnancy. So take adequate precautions to see to it that before you get married, have a good evaluation, and especially after getting married, have a pre-pregnancy counseling before you plan your marriage. I think it's about 20 minutes. I'll just take another 5 minutes, Mahesh, and then we'll take up the questions. I thought this introduction might try to
No problem, sir. Have your
some of the questions that our audience might have had at the back of their mind. At least they can pass on to their sons and daughters if they are not connected. That's why it's stressed upon this. So women getting pregnant without realizing that they have developed mild diabetes is a huge risk in our population, and women developing diabetes in the later part of the pregnancy, which we call as gestational diabetes, is important for the simple reason that could be some problems to the fetus at the time of delivery. This mother is prone for diabetes at a later time. Mother is also prone for some complications at the time of delivery. And more importantly, this is absolutely important, women. That's why I keep on telling about women. The child born to you, when you have got diabetes, gestational diabetes especially, that child is more prone for developing obesity, insulin resistant diabetes. So this goes like a cycle. I think we need to cut off the cycle. The best way to cut off the cycle is to resist the temptation, or if you're going to eat more, spend the calories, see to it that you keep your body weight under control. It is not only from the cosmetic point of view, absolutely from the point of view of science and your health is absolutely important. Not only your health, the health of the subsequent progeny, for which I think you and I are morally responsible. Now, why should you treat diabetes? Somebody with a blood sugar of 500, last weight, doesn't have any energy to do, have got symptoms of neuropathy, some sort of a genital itching. The fungal infection, the genital is absolutely a common indication that the sugar is out of control. So these are some of the apparent indications that the sugar has to be brought down. But once you bring down the blood sugar to the vicinity of 200 or so, then most of the symptoms will disappear. And as I told you earlier, bulk of the diabetic patients are not symptomatic. Then why do we treat? We treat diabetes to a target, which means to a particular level. You have to bring down the blood sugar level and maintain it as close to that level as possible for a major portion of the life, excepting in situations wherein such strict control might be detrimental. For example, somebody has developed a stroke, somebody is elderly, somebody has developed some kidney problem. At that point of time, you relax and then allow them to have a slightly higher blood sugar level, because at that point of time, low sugar is much more dangerous to life rather than a tight control. Whereas the bulk of the diabetic subjects, you need to follow regular treatment with your physician. I repeat, diabetes doesn't go with one prescription. It is not like your tuberculosis, it is not like your malaria or urinary infection, wherein a single prescription might cure you of the disease. Here you talk of control. This control has to be maintained to a particular target. It is called a target driven, like your BP. Sugar has to be treated to your target, which is possible. Nowadays, we have got good amount of excellent drugs, I would say, which enable us rather to pass on the benefits to you, to keep your blood sugar control within the targets that the scientific bodies are recommended throughout the world, which all of us are following. Now, when I say that, a couple of words about diet. Can I control my diabetes with the diet alone? Diet alone as a prescription might be relevant for a small proportion of the patients in the early part of the disease if you catch the disease very early. But while diet is absolutely important, exercise is absolutely important, do not insist your physician when he wants to introduce a tablet, doctor, give me some more time. I'll just do it already. But treating a disease with tablets need not be taken as a taboo. Doctor, I do not want tablets. If I have tablets, I'll be requiring it for the rest of my life. No, it is not the fault of the tablets. It is the fault of the disease, and good sugar control, especially if it is embarked in the early part of the disease and continued throughout, it is much more important. Now, second question that you tend to ask is, say somebody has been treated with say X, Y, Z drugs. At some point of the time when complications develop, we try to withdraw or reduce the dose of the medication and introduce insulin. At that point of time, I think it's very, very relevant. I repeat, many of my patients have asked this question. I have answered it patiently. It's the duty of the physicians to clarify. Now, you have taken a particular tablet, say X, Y, Z, for 15 years. Then the doctor withdraws the tablet because you have developed kidney disease. The question is, the tablets that I have taken all these years, has it damaged my kidneys? The answer is NO. Please take it from me. None of the tablets available for prescription today, which have been time tested, which have been used for decades, even the newer drugs, none of them can damage your kidneys or your liver or your eyes. It is your diabetes that results in these tissue dysfunction. But why we alter the medication is at some point of the time, for example, you've got advanced stages of kidney problem, then there are certain drugs which are very good, Those drugs have to be reduced in dose, and some other drugs have to be withdrawn because at that point of time it becomes risky because it can produce hypoglycemia. So change of prescription does not mean that the treatment that you have been hitherto taken has been faulty and resulted in a tissue dysfunction, because this is a common perception that many patients do have. The second thing is coming back to the diet. I think if you talk about diet, we can talk for days together because there are so many aspects of diet. Now, how much of carbs? Yes. Is it zero carb, low carb, or high carb? High carb, I'm sure. Being a knowledgeable audience like this, high carb is certainly dangerous. Zero carb, I do not believe in that. So, for example, the paleo diet. Now, what happens in paleo diet is it's more or less a zero carb diet. You derive all the energy from the fats. Now, there have been attractive hypotheses to suggest that when fats are substituted, some of the tissues have got the facility to utilize fats, fat-derived fatty acids, and technically what we call as ketone bodies, as a better fuel than glucose. Now, this might work initially because good number of my patients have shifted from my practice to some other practice wherein they've been managed the paleo diet. What happens is the sudden reduction in the carbohydrates gives a cushion for the clinician to down titrate, which means you have been on say 3 or 4 tablets, we'll be able to control with 1 or 2 tablets. Insulin dose would have been about 40-50 units, hardly any insulin, or 10 to 12 units. This apparent early benefit gives the confidence to the patients. Okay, I have missed this form of therapy. But what will happen is, this is what even the literature says, and some of the clinicians may not agree, but the bulk might agree. What happens is down the line, the beta cell function becomes worse, which means the pancreas is not able to produce insulin, which means all the good effects that I've been having in the last 1 or 2 years temporarily becomes overblown like anything. So your blood sugar, which was 110 and 160, now the fasting is 230 and postprandial is 320. Go back to same physician with an apology that you have not under his follow for a certain. I wouldn't blame the patients because the media is also highlighting. So paleo diet, yes, it has got its own advantages. In the context of diabetes, as a permanent substitute, I do not believe that. On the contrary, it might be detrimental in the long run. And there are some evidence in literature suggests that even from the cardiovascular point of view, it may not be beneficial. What about the carbs? I believe in moderate carbs to the tune of about 50 to 55%, not the high carb diet. And also, whenever we talk about diet, I believe strongly in this. In fact, I have been practicing diabetology for 35 years. I do not have a dietitian. I just tell. Now, there is no justification for drastically changing the diet. Avoid rice, avoid idlis, avoid dosa. Absolutely, I do not concur to that view. In fact, I feel idli is one of the best form of the diet because it is baked. It has rice as well as protein, ulundu and arisi. So you have the protein as well as the carbohydrate in a form which is baked. And if you want to add some oil, nalane you can add, then it gives carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Only thing is, somebody having about 6 or 7 idlis with a good sambar or a side dish, non-vegetarian side dish, advise them to cut down the size to, Raghavan is connecting. Hi, Raghavan. So advise them to get to 3 idlis or 4 idlis, depending upon that. So diet should be in a way, because diet, you have identified, you have grown with the diet that your forefathers, your parents, your grandparents have used. They are not fools, but modify it to suit your body mechanism so that portioning of the diet is much more important rather than drastically switching the diet. Of course, fatty foods, sweets, etc. have to be avoided. A word about insulin. Even in type 2 diabetes, when the tablets fail to work, It is not the failure of the tablets. It is a pancreas which has all along been working that refuses to work. So that mandates, that makes the choice very obligatory for the clinician to suggest insulin. Do not react. Do not have a sense of guilt. It is not your fault at all, nor it is not the enthusiasm of the clinician. It is dictated by the disease. Excellent insulins are available, which will make your life more comfortable, which can postpone or even avoid the complications, and you can lead a healthy life. A word before I finish about COVID and diabetes. I'm sure all of you are looking forward for this. Yes, diabetics are probably much more prone for a complicated form of the disease. Please remember, diabetics are much more prone for the complicated form of COVID, which means they might have the respiratory problems, they may require hospitalization, and more importantly, the treatment that is also given for COVID, which includes steroids, can kick up the sugar, and probably the suffering as well as the mortality is high in diabetes. Don't have to get scared yourself. Now that we have opened out, have the social distancing, have the masking, keep your sugar under control, see to it that you visit your physician and diabetologist or endocrinologist. Do not change anybody for the sake of the profile that they do have. Continue the treatment because proximity is more important, access is more important now. And we treat diabetes, as I told earlier, for complications. The complications involve the blood circulation to the heart, to the brain, and to the legs. And maybe I've forgotten to add, smoking is one aspect which has been thoroughly discouraged in all diabetic subjects. All the complications of diabetes, especially with respect to the heart and the legs, are increased by 30 times. It is not your 30%. 30 into 100 is 3,000 percentage increase in these things. So men folk, please avoid smoking. And of course, nowadays, even we see once in a way, some of the girls or the women are also part of this extravaganza. Please stop it, because there are no drugs to undo the side effects of smoking. Diet I've discussed in very, very brief detail. So I've made an attempt to give a overview of the disease, how it is produced, what are the types, what is the importance of the women and diabetes, especially that I have spent more time, and then how do we treat diabetes, why we treat diabetes, about the safety of the tablets, whatever tablet, and about the role of insulin and the complications, and added in the end about the COVID and diabetes. I think I've taken exactly 30 minutes. Mahesh,
Okay, sir. No problem, sir.
please.
Even if
Now
you
I
have
think
anything left out, also please.
for the questions. And again, once again, a greeting to my friend Raghavan. Hi, Raghavan.
Sir, good evening, sir. Thank you so much. Sorry, I had some trouble logging in, sir. That's all. Sir, I wanted to ask you one question.
Okay,
there is always this worry that once you go on insulin, the complication rates of diabetes increases. Is that the insulin is a trouble? Because people say already you are excess in insulin, adding more insulin will cause more trouble to you. The hyperinsulinemia theory and all. Is that true, sir? Or is that it is the mature stage of the diabetes that your complications are going to happen anyway?
good question. Thank you for asking a question for which I know the answer, Raghavan. Otherwise, you're so knowledgeable. And yeah.
Sir, please, sir.
There is a difference between endogenous insulin and exogenous insulin. Now, endogenous insulin is the one we were discussing earlier. That is, at the onset of the disease, there is insulin resistance. That is, the insulin is sluggish in action. The beta cell, the body tries to produce more insulin. This is the stage of hyperinsulinemia, wherein more insulin than is required is present or produced by the body because it is defective, sluggish in action. Qualitatively, it's sluggish. That is why at that point of time, initial part of the disease, when somebody is obese, blood sugar is around 250 or so, put them on diet, cut down the calories, make them exercise, make them lose weight. Once they lose weight, the hyperinsulinemia comes down. So yes, insulin produced by the body, if it is in over and excess of what is actually required, and if that situation is going to be continuing for a longer time, it can produce havoc. This is exactly different to somebody who has spent about 15 years with the disease, wherein the blood sugar fasting is 250, postprandial is 380, HbA1c is 10.5, wherein the doctor says add insulin. At that time, these two need not be linked. It's a different type of insulin. It's an exogenous insulin. You have reached a stage wherein the disease burnt out, we say. That is, there is no insulin in the beta cells of the pancreas. At that point of time, supplementation with insulin is absolutely essential. Now, the timing and the temporal sequence I'll explain to you. For example, somebody is on tablets for a longer time, say 12 years, 15 years, the creatinine is 1.5, 1.6. The doctor calculates, he downsizes the doses of the medication, reduces insulin because insulin is safe. Now, after the introduction of insulin, there could be a scenario wherein either the patient has got an acute urinary infection or something, or even the natural history, from 1.8, it goes to say 2.5. Now, the introduction of the insulin is mandated by the onset of the complication. Now, after that, the creatinine goes up. So the patient gets an impression, is it the insulin that is doing the damage? It is the natural history of the disease. This natural history of diabetic kidney disease can be hastened. It can be accentuated. It can be in a much more rigorous form if there are complications like UTI. I think Raghavan can allude to that point better than I.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So
I
this is the sequence and the link between endogenous and exogenous insulin.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for that answer. And a word or two about the modern drugs that are come into the market, the SGLT inhibitors and things like that.
Yeah.
Are they going to make a difference in the way we are? And another one more point is about the insulin pump as well. Just to the two or three things. These are common questions asked to me in the clinic, sir. That's why I'm asking this.
Sure, Raghavan. Yeah. Number one, the modern drugs. Yes. The SGLT2 inhibitors in the oral form, and we have an injectable form called the GLP-1 receptor agonist. So these two have made a sensational impact in the complications of diabetes mellitus. Both of them have been found to have a favorable impact in the cardiovascular disease, the SGLT2 especially in cardiac failure. Now, heart failure is one of the complications. Even as we as clinicians have started appreciating that it could be one of the earliest manifestations of the diabetic vascular disease. So previously we used to talk about controlling the diabetes and then identifying the risk factors. By risk factors, we mean hypertension, the lipids, the sedentary lifestyle, the central adiposity, etc. Now, besides addressing all these things, in the SGLT2 inhibitors, we have a class of drugs which probably have an independent, I repeat, an independent favorable effect on cardiac failure and kidney disease. This has been proved both in the diabetic as well as the non-diabetic population. So SGLT2 inhibitors are excellent drugs, latest additions to the therapeutic armamentarium of diabetics. A lot of molecules are available, and fortunately in one molecule, generic forms are now available. They do have a significant favorable impact, and they are absolutely safe both in the kidney disease as well as the cardiac failure hospitalization. So that is number one. Number two, you did mention about the insulin pumps. Now, when we start in the diabetic subject, a type 2 diabetic, we always start with a small dose of insulin, a single prick of insulin, which we call it as the basal insulin. The understanding is you continue most of the oral tablets that you have been hitherto on, just introduce a small dose of insulin. You can start with a small dose and then go up. This is the simplest form of the injectable therapy, the basal insulin plus OH, oral tablets. After that, you require 2 or 3 doses of insulin, and in the full-blown disease, you go by what is called as the basal bolus. That is, you have 3 pricks to control the meal-related sugar and 1 prick to control the fasting blood sugar level. Now, at this stage, in some people, in the context of type 2 diabetic subjects, the swings in the blood sugar level will be more erratic. The insulin requirement will be more huge, and they could be candidates for an insulin pump. So type 2 subjects who could be identified by the clinicians as problem diabetic subjects with episodes of hypo and hyper and difficulty in controlling the sugar, especially the dips in the blood sugar level, and who are not gone in for complications, could be candidates for insulin therapy, insulin pump in the type 2, number one. Number two, in the context of pregnancy and diabetes, the blood sugar control, the target blood sugar is very, very stiff. Fasting should be less than 95, postprandial should be less than 120, before conception or at the time of conception, and then throughout pregnancy. It's virtually impossible, especially in type 2 diabetic subjects or even in GDM. In some subjects, certainly if they can afford insulin therapy, insulin pump is an option. Number three, all type 1 diabetic subjects should be encouraged, should be motivated, because now there are variable financial helps by the various companies which market the insulin pumps, because pumps are expensive. You have anywhere between 1.5 or 2 to 5 lakhs cost, but you can buy, like you buy your electronic gadget, you can buy an insulin pump in EMI, which I feel is very essential in the context of type 1 diabetic subjects. So these are the 3 scenarios wherein one can easily fit in the role of the insulin pumps.
Thank you so much, sir. Really, these are things which I have wanted to ask a long time. Never had a chance to come and see you or ask you these questions.
You are very
Sir, one
busy.
more question. Say, all the time we are working, these things come to your head, but you never ask the questions, you see. Uh, I'm seeing a lot of young diabetics, 20 years old, 24-year-old. Um, the confusion is whether they are type 1 or type 2. That is one thing I wanted to, because previously type 1 was supposed to be young people, type 2 is supposed to be old. But I understand now that those boundaries have been completely broken. The younger people are also called type 2, isn't it, nowadays? That's one thing. And last, before you go off, uh, this is my observation. I expressed this observation to Vivek, our nephrologist as well. I find a sort of change in the foreskin in young diabetics as a prelude to onset of nephrological problems in future. I correlated that in my head as small vessel disease. Is that something you have observed as well?
Yeah. So first, I think we were talking about
The age of onset of
the age of onset.
diabetes.
Yes. In fact, this is what we were discussing earlier. Also, the classical type 1 diabetes always occurs in the younger subjects. Classical, but no age is a bar. Unfortunately, type 1 diabetes is very rare in our country. Now, what will happen is in somebody, for example, I have seen this happening, yeah, especially in the women. So a woman in the age group of say 30 with a previous childbirth who has had some diabetes, neglects her diabetes, puts on about 15 kgs, the blood sugar is 300 and 450 and ketones are positive. Ketones are positive. So whenever ketones are positive, I think clinically you're justified in making a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes, that is the insulin deficient diabetes previously called. Now, if you examine her, she'll have this acanthosis nigricans, the thickening of the skin at the back of the neck, which is a marker for insulin resistance, which is a marker that she is a type 2 diabetes mellitus. She'll have grossly obese, central adiposity is more, and then she has allowed herself to result in such a scenario thanks to her huge discrepancy in the lifestyle. Now, you treat this patient with insulin, motivate her. Excellent drugs are available to make her lose weight, plus she should be motivated. Down the line, you do the extra investigations. Her beta cell function is reasonably good. Her beta cells are able to produce the pancreas. You can maintain this patient on tablets for a good length of time. So, presentation like a type 1 in the middle age group, especially in women with a small history of diabetes mellitus, the sugars are very high, ketones positive, making the clinician entertain the possibility of type 1 diabetes might turn out to be a type 2 diabetes mellitus. That's number one. Number two, there is yet another category of diabetes mellitus, which is called as latent autoimmune diabetes of adults, which is called as LADA. Typically, if we call it as 1.5 diabetes, it's between type 1 and type 2. It occurs, it is much more slow destruction of the pancreas. So quite often, these individuals are lean, not obese. And the thing is, the temptation is, if you introduce a small dose of tablets, they can respond for a variable period, for say up to 6 months to 1 year. They may respond to tablets, giving a clinical impression that they could be type 2 diabetic subjects, but soon after the response to tablets is not adequate enough, warranting you to introduce the introduction of insulin. So this is a subtype of type 1 diabetes mellitus, which is called as latent autoimmune type of diabetes mellitus. Other autoimmune diseases can be present. They are invariably lean. The age group is between 30 to 40. We see a lot of such cases. So the two clinical situations wherein clinical confusion can happen is one, a middle-aged individual presenting with ketosis with very high blood sugar level, and the second is LADA. And with respect to the prepuce, the balanitis, I think, is one of the manifestations, I'm sure. I think would have seen much more. In fact, you have referred many more patients. You and other urologists referred to me. Patient come to you with a balanitis. They may or may not have phimosis, and then you do your blood sugar, it's high, you refer to us. That's how it is picked up. Yes, there has been some theories and suggestions that the microangiopathy in the foreskin or the prepuce could be a marker, in my opinion. If you do probably glycosylation of the hair follicle, that has been found to identify the glycosylation of proteins long run. What I'm trying to say is each tissue has got identity that the blood sugar has been high, very high for quite some time, depending upon their protein turnover. So they are altered structurally, functionally, and also when the blood vessels, the microangiopathy are altered, you have the evidence of microangiopathy everywhere, and sometimes they are symptomatic, and at other times, these manifestations are silent.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
So thank you very much, sir. And I think there is one question is available from the audience side. The question is that, sir, shall we replace new one or restoring our own pancreas? If it is possible, then our insulin production is in a balanced way to regulate the blood glucose.
So pancreatic transplantation again is it's in infancy. As I've understood, certainly it is an option to be considered, especially when a diabetic has got the renal transplant. So combined renal and pancreatic, there are a lot of technical aspects. I'm sure somebody even in Apollo we have a transplant surgeon can tell more about it. It is a islet cell transplantation or the whole transplantation or a combined transplantation. The issue is certainly the diabetic state becomes more manageable after a transplantation, but some of the immunosuppressive drugs have to be taken. They can be associated with some side effects. Certainly, it's an option which gives rise to a good amount of, what shall we say, people who have been given up or the pancreas is totally gone, you can. On the other hand, in a contrasting view, I would suggest that very, very obese people, BMI of 38, 40, diabetes, you can undergo bariatric surgery. Now, bariatric surgery, there are multiple options. The weight reduction that you achieve is phenomenal, 30 to 40 kgs. Your diabetes disappears, your hypertension disappears, your lipids. Of course, there could be some side effects. There could be some compulsive necessity to consume some micronutrients and vitamins because you are bypassing some portion of the intestine, which are essential for the production of some vitamins and absorption. So you have to supplement. Beyond that, I think more than a transplantation, in the context of our population, in my limited experience, I would say that bariatric surgery will be a better option, worth the consideration, especially if you are very obese with diabetes and also with other complications, because obesity associated problems, it's not restricted to diabetes. It is your obstructive sleep apnea, snoring, which could be dangerous to the body, your backache, your osteoarthritis, your fatty liver. Some of them with a starts of fatty liver can go in for end-stage liver disease, warranting a liver transplantation. So the ramification of obesity is enormous. I think in the long run, in my opinion, bariatric surgery, which again is in infancy, of course, many people are coming to voluntary to undergo this procedure. This is an option rather than a transplant, even though transplant is an option, can be considered when there is a necessity for transplant both the kidney and some portion of the pancreas. That's my understanding.
So thank you, sir. And one question from our side, sir, that is today, if you see, sir, in supermarket or wherever you go, there has been lot of pushed materials like you have millets, fiber rich, this, that, and all. So many products are available. Is there any guideline that which one to choose for a better diet or something like that?
Absolutely not required at all. See, you can have, as I told you, see, many people have this fenugreek, Mendium.
Yeah.
So, Mendium, Ratri Ura Vichitu, have the juice in the morning. Don't have to do it. See, when you prepare the flour for the idli or the dosa, you add Mendium.
Yes.
And you add Mendium. So, Mendium is good. It contains fiber. Maybe it has got some good medicinal properties, but do not regard it as a medicine. And do not go in for proprietary preparations, just giving some face value and then marketing it as. So they could be likewise Pavakai. Pavakai is good in fiber. So the fibers that you have as a component of the day-to-day consumption of your fruits and vegetables will give you the good amount of the fiber content and the nutritive effect and also the protective effect with respect to the fiber, etc. But a word about the, not because I think Forts is promoting this, partnering this patient awareness. Normally when we write a B complex, we always say, and quite often we question, is a B complex required for every prescription that most of the practitioners or even the so-called specialists nowadays start adding every, not necessarily in the context of the COVID wherein you talk about zinc deficiency. But what has happened is, we used to believe that if somebody is going to have a good amount of the recommended daily allowance of the vegetables and fruits, which is about 4 to 5 cups a day, then you should have a good supplementation of your micronutrients. But unfortunately, the quality or the nutritive content of the micronutrient and mineral of the soil has come down. This has been proved across the country. It is an elegant study. 1 lakh soil samples across the country. The vitamin C, the thiamine content, as well as some of the minerals, it has been found to be reduced by 40 to 80%. So there is a justification. So if somebody is going to have some B complex supplementation prescribed by your doctor, don't think that it is just a fancy prescription. There is a justification. Otherwise, to estimate the deficiency in an individual is a time consuming and a cost, it's not a cost effective procedure. So supplementation in the form of mild preparations can be there either outside OTC across the counter or prescribed by a doctor. That is my take on the micronutrients. With respect to the fiber, I feel you just rely upon your natural ways of consuming the fibers.
Right, sir. And one more question, sir. GLP treatment, what is the response in type 2 diabetes management?
Excellent. GLP-1 receptor agonist could be the first injectable space. I'm sure this question asked by a doctor. If it is by a non-doctor, I'm extremely happy that the awareness has been created. Now, GLP is a hormone which is produced by the body. It is produced in response to your intake of food. It has multiple actions. It sees to it that your pancreas produces sufficient amount of insulin to control the blood sugar level, and then it also sends signals to the brain to say to it that, look, the adequate amount of nutrition has reached the system, so the appetite has to be suppressed. And the GLP-1 receptors are probably present in other tissues as well, so that we talk about the cardiovascular renal benefits. The GLP-1 receptor agonists are very good. So as anti-diabetic drugs, they address the blood sugar level in a physiological way, no hypoglycemia, weight loss is there, and elegant studies are there that show the cardiovascular as well as renal benefits. This is the positive aspects. Of course, the negative aspects is motivating the patients. They are the injectables, expensive, even though once a week forms are available, still is a prick. And initially, about 2 or 3 weeks, first 2 or 3 injection, mild gastrointestinal side effects may be there. But what is precluding their usage is the cost and the injectable form. But otherwise, they are excellent therapeutic options. They could be even thought of as the first injectable space even before the introduction of insulin.
Right. So thank you very much, sir. Thanks for sparing your time and answered all the questions. I don't think any new questions has come. So once again, on behalf of Ports as well as the Rotary Club of Adyar, so we are very happy, sir, to say thanks to you for sparing your time as well as answered all the questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mahesh, Mr. Nagashankar, and once again a big thanks to my great friend Raghavan, and also to all my friends of Rotary of Adyar.
Sir, I should say thank you, sir. Please, sir. I should say thank you to you.
Yes. Thanks for the opportunity. Stay safe.
For
Thank you so much, sir. It's amazing response. Almost at one
sir.
point of time, it crossed 100 people also. Okay. So amazing response. So thank you so much, sir.
People have benefited. I'm happy if I've done something to make them much more knowledgeable with respect to diabetes. And
sir, this recording will be there, sir. We will put it in our Rotary group.
Okay.
And we will be, if people wanted to forward the recording to another, I will forward it to my school group, college group and all. So just for people to know, because such a common topic, such a discussed topic. So I'm going to take your permission for that now itself, sir.
Sure, certainly.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day. Thanks, Mahesh.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Raghavan, once again. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.